First person in my family to ever own property. My father's reaction on the porch changed everything. I've been lurking on this sub for years, reading your stories about buying homes, negotiating mortgages, and building equity. Those stories kept me going through every setback. Now I have my own story to tell, and it's not just about a house. It's about breaking a cycle that's lasted generations in my family, the complicated guilt that comes with it, and how I finally learned to stop apologizing for building something new. I'm 32F, born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia. Not the gleaming Buckhead Atlanta with the high-rises and the Tesla dealerships, but the other Atlanta, the patchwork of neighborhoods south of I-20 where the houses lean a little, where the corner stores have bulletproof glass, and where everybody knows somebody who almost made it out. My parents, James, 58M, and Denise, 55F Carter, have rented their entire lives. Their parents rented. Their grandparents. Well, that's a different, longer, more painful American story that I won't get into here, but let's just say that homeownership was never something that was handed to us. It was something that was, for generations, actively kept away from us. I closed on a 3-bedroom, 2-bath bungalow in the West End neighborhood of Atlanta on March 14, 2025. Purchase price, $267,000. 30-year fixed mortgage at 6.2%. My monthly payment, including taxes and insurance, comes to $1,847. I put down $28,000, every dollar I had saved over 8 years of working, scrimping, and saying no to things I wanted. And the moment I signed the last page of closing documents, I did not feel triumphant. I felt like I was going to throw up. This is the story of how I got here, and why it almost broke me to do something that should have been the proudest moment of my life. Part 1. The Foundation. Let me tell you about my parents, because you can't understand my story without understanding theirs. My father, James Carter, has worked for the City of Atlanta Sanitation Department for 31 years. He started when he was 27. He will retire in 4 years with a modest pension and Social Security. He has never missed a day of work that wasn't for a funeral or a hospital visit. He is, without exaggeration, the most reliable man I have ever known. He wakes up at 4:15 every morning. He drinks 1 cup of coffee, black. He leaves by 4:50. He has done this for 31 years. My mother, Denise Carter, worked as a home health aide for most of my childhood, then transitioned to an administrative role at a small medical billing company in College Park when her knees gave out from years of lifting patients. She makes $38,000 a year. She has made roughly that amount, adjusted slightly, for the past 15 years. Together, my parents' combined household income has hovered between $72,000 and $80,000 for most of my adult life. In most American cities, that's a reasonable household income. In Atlanta, it's enough to get by. It has never been enough, not with the way things were structured for them, to buy a home. And I need to be specific about why, because for a long time, I didn't understand it myself, and I carried a quiet, unexamined assumption that my parents had done something wrong. That maybe they weren't disciplined enough. Maybe they spent too much. Maybe they just didn't try hard enough. I am ashamed to admit I thought these things, even subconsciously, because they are not true, and I should have known better. Here is the truth. My parents got married in 1993. They tried to buy a house in 1998, when I was 5. They found a small ranch in East Point, listed at $74,000. They applied for a mortgage through a lender who had been advertising in the neighborhood, flyers on telephone poles, cards left under windshield wipers. They were approved, but the terms were predatory. The interest rate was 11.4%, with a balloon payment structure that would have doubled their monthly cost after 5 years. My father's uncle, a deacon who had seen other families lose homes to similar arrangements, warned them away. They walked. They tried again in 2003. This time, they went to a traditional bank. They were denied. The reason given was insufficient credit history, despite the fact that they had been paying rent, $750 a month, on time for 10 years. Rent payments, as many of you know, were not reported to credit bureaus back then unless you went through a specific service, which my parents did not know existed. Their decade of reliable payments was invisible to the system that was judging them. They tried a third time in 2007. They were approved, this time through a subprime lender offering adjustable-rate mortgages with no money down. My mother told me years later that she had a bad feeling about it, that the broker kept saying, "Don't worry about the rate adjustment, you'll refinance before then," and that the whole thing felt rushed. But they were so tired of renting. So tired of asking a landlord for permission to paint a wall or fix a leaky faucet. They were ready to sign. Then the 2008 financial crisis hit. The lender went under before the deal closed. My parents were left with nothing but a credit inquiry on their record and a deep, bone-level distrust of the entire mortgage system. They never tried again. They have lived in the same rented duplex on Connolly Drive for 22 years. The rent has gone from $750 to $1,475. They have paid, over those 22 years, approximately $285,000 in rent. They own nothing. They have no equity. They have a modest emergency fund of about $8,000 and a retirement account that my mother started 10 years ago with a current balance of roughly $41,000. These are not people who failed. These are people the system failed. And it took me a long time to understand the difference. Part 2. The Climb. I graduated from Georgia State University in 2015 with a degree in accounting and $34,000 in student loan debt. I got a job at a mid-size accounting firm in Midtown, making $47,000. I lived at home with my parents, paying them $400 a month for rent, which my mother tried to refuse, and my father insisted I pay because, as he said, grown folks pay their way. I want to be clear about something. I did not have some grand, cinematic plan to buy a house. There was no vision board. There was no YouTube guru who changed my life. There was just a slow, grinding accumulation of knowledge that I gathered piece by piece, mostly from the internet, mostly late at night, mostly while sitting on my twin bed in the room I'd had since I was 7 years old. I learned about credit scores. I learned that mine was 621 when I first checked it, dragged down by my student loans and a medical bill from an ER visit I didn't know had gone to collections. I disputed the medical bill. I set up autopay on my student loans. I got a secured credit card with a $300 limit and used it to buy gas, paying it off every month. Within 18 months, my score was 711. I learned about down payment assistance programs. I qualified for the Georgia Dream Homeownership Program, which offered down payment assistance for first-time buyers meeting income requirements. I attended the required homebuyer education course, 8 hours on a Saturday in a fluorescent-lit conference room in a government building downtown, learning about escrow and PMI and debt-to-income ratios. I was the youngest person in the room by at least 10 years. I took 6 pages of notes. I started saving aggressively in 2018. I kept a spreadsheet. I automated transfers to a high-yield savings account. I did not eat out more than twice a month. I drove a 2009 Honda Civic with a dent in the passenger door and a radio that only picked up AM stations. I said no to vacations. I said no to concerts. I said no to a lot of things that my friends were doing, and I watched my social life thin out because of it. Some weekends, the loneliness was worse than the financial pressure. By 2022, I had $18,000 saved. I also had gotten promoted twice and was making $68,000. I switched jobs to a larger firm, a move I had been afraid to make for 2 years because loyalty felt safe, even when it was costing me money, and my salary jumped to $78,000. By late 2024, I had $28,000 in my savings account. My credit score was 748. My student loans were down to $11,000. I started looking at homes. And that's when things got complicated in a way I hadn't anticipated. Not financially. Emotionally. Part 3. The Wait. I did not tell my parents I was house hunting. I told myself it was because I didn't want to get their hopes up if it fell through, and that was partly true. But the deeper truth, the one I couldn't look at directly, was that I felt guilty. How do you celebrate buying a house when the two people who raised you, who sacrificed for you, who worked their entire lives with dignity and consistency, have never been able to do the same thing? How do you pop champagne in front of people who were denied the same opportunity 3 times? How do you hang a wreath on your own front door when your mother has to ask her landlord's permission to hang a nail? I found the house in January 2025. A 1940s bungalow in the West End, hardwood floors, original built-in shelving, a screened porch in the back, and a yard with a magnolia tree that the listing agent described as established. It needed work. The kitchen was dated. One of the bathrooms had a slow drain. The HVAC was old but functional. But the bones were good, and the neighborhood was changing. New restaurants going in on Ralph David Abernathy Boulevard, a coffee shop on the corner where a check-cashing place used to be. I could see a future there. I made an offer. $267,000, asking price. The seller accepted the same day. I went through underwriting. I provided bank statements, tax returns, pay stubs, 2 years of W-2s, a letter explaining a $1,200 deposit that turned out to be a birthday gift from my aunt. The process was invasive and exhausting and humbling, and every step of it reminded me of what my parents had gone through, except that the system had finally, grudgingly, decided that I was acceptable. I closed on March 14th. And then I had to tell my parents. I drove to their duplex on Connolly Drive on a Sunday afternoon. My mother was in the kitchen making peach cobbler. My father was in his recliner watching the Braves game with the volume too loud, the way he always does. The duplex smelled like cinnamon and sugar and the particular mustiness of old carpet that no amount of cleaning can fully eliminate. This was home. This had always been home. And I was about to tell them that I had built a different one. I bought a house, I said. Just like that. No preamble, no build-up. The words fell out of me like something heavy I'd been carrying in my mouth. My mother turned from the stove. My father muted the television, which is how you know something significant has happened in the Carter household. James Carter does not mute the Braves for anything less than seismic news. You what? My mother said. I closed on a house. 2 weeks ago. In the West End. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms. It's mine. There was a silence that lasted probably 5 seconds but felt like it stretched across the whole history of our family. And then my mother started crying. Not sad crying. Not angry crying. A particular kind of crying that I had never seen from her before. This trembling, full-body release, like something she'd been holding in her chest for decades, had suddenly cracked open. She put her hand over her mouth and sank into one of the kitchen chairs, and the sound she made was not a word. It was something older than language. My father stood up from his recliner. He walked to me. He is not a man who hugs. The Carter men shake hands, they clap shoulders, they nod with their whole bodies. But he put both arms around me and held on, and I felt his chest shake once, hard, before he steadied himself. My girl, he said. Just that. My girl. Update 1. The conversation I wasn't ready for. After the cobbler had been served, and the tears had been wiped, and the Braves game had resumed at a more reasonable volume, my mother asked me a question that cracked something open inside me. Baby, why didn't you tell us you were looking? And there it was. The question I'd been dreading. Because I felt guilty, I said. And once I started, I couldn't stop. Because you and Daddy have worked your whole lives and you never got to do this. Because it feels wrong that I get to have something you were denied. Because I'm afraid that every time you come to my house, you'll think about the house you almost bought in East Point, or the one the bank said no to, or the one that fell through in 2007. Because I don't want my success to feel like a reminder of your pain. My mother looked at me the way she does when I have said something that is simultaneously very intelligent and profoundly stupid. Keisha Nicole Carter, she said, using my full name, which is never a casual choice. Do you think we raised you so you could stay in the same place we were? Do you think your father gets up at 4 in the morning so that you can feel bad about doing better? That's not what I... That is exactly what you said. And I need you to hear me. She leaned forward. We didn't get to buy a house. That is a fact. It is not a tragedy you need to carry. It is not a debt you owe. We did what we could with what we had, and what we had was enough to raise a daughter who could do what we couldn't. That is the whole point, baby. You are the whole point. My father, who had been quiet, said, Your mama's right. Then he unmuted the Braves. Update 2. The Move and the Reckoning. I moved into the house on April 5th. My father and my Uncle Ray and 2 of my cousins helped me move. My mother directed operations from the screened porch with a clipboard she'd bought specifically for the occasion, assigning rooms and furniture placement with the efficiency of a logistics coordinator. When the truck was empty and the boxes were stacked and everyone was eating the Popeyes my mother had arranged in what she called the dining room, but was actually the living room because the dining room was full of boxes, I stood in the kitchen alone for a minute. My kitchen. My countertops. My slow-drain bathroom. My magnolia tree visible through the window over the sink. The guilt hadn't gone away. Not entirely. But it had changed shape. It was less a wall and more a door, something I could see through, even if I hadn't fully walked through it yet. In the weeks that followed, I started noticing things. Small things that accumulated. My mother started texting me links to home improvement stores. They have a sale on backsplash tile at Floor & Decor, she'd write at 6:30 in the morning, accompanied by a photo she'd screenshot from the website. She had never, in her entire life, browsed for backsplash tile. She had never had a reason to. My father came by one Saturday and spent 3 hours fixing the screen door on the porch. He didn't ask. He just showed up with tools. When I tried to thank him, he said, the hinge was wrong. I fixed it. Then he asked if I had any sweet tea. My younger brother, Marcus, 28M, called me from Savannah, where he works at a logistics company. Sis, I've been thinking, he said. I started looking at my credit score. It's not great. But I was wondering if you could show me what you did. Like, the steps. That one hit me harder than I expected. Marcus has always been the easygoing one in our family, the one who rolls with whatever comes, who doesn't plan too far ahead. Hearing him ask about credit scores felt like watching a door open that I didn't know existed. I spent 2 hours on the phone with him. I walked him through everything: the secured credit card, the dispute process, the automated savings, the Georgia Dream program. I sent him the spreadsheet template I'd built. He asked good questions. When we hung up, he said, "I'm not saying I'm gonna buy a house tomorrow, but I want to know I could." Update 3. The dinner and the truth. 6 weeks after I moved in, I hosted Sunday dinner at my house for the first time. This was significant. In our family, Sunday dinner has always been at my parents' duplex. Always. It is the fixed point around which the Carter family orbits. Suggesting it move to my house felt almost sacrilegious. But my mother insisted. "You have a dining room," she said pointedly. "Use it." So I did. I cooked. Badly, honestly. The greens were overcooked, and the cornbread was underdone, and the mac and cheese was fine, but not as good as my mother's, which she noted with diplomatic restraint. My Aunt Teresa brought sweet potato pie. My Uncle Ray brought a six-pack. My cousins brought their kids. The house was loud and full and alive in a way that empty rooms never are. After dinner, when the kids were in the backyard chasing each other around the magnolia tree, and the men were watching basketball, and the women were in the kitchen doing what my mother calls the real fellowship, my Aunt Teresa pulled me aside. "Your grandmother tried to buy a house in 1972, she said. "I didn't know this. My grandmother, Ruth, died in 2011. We rarely talked about her life before she moved to Atlanta. She was in Macon," Teresa continued. "Found a little place on the east side of town. Saved up for 2 years. When she went to the bank, they told her she needed a co-signer. She asked your grandfather. He couldn't co-sign because his credit was tied up in a truck loan for his job. She asked her brother. He was in the same situation. She asked 3 different banks. Same answer every time. She never got the house." Teresa looked around my dining room. "She would have loved this. I mean it, she would have sat right there at that table and she would have wept. Not because she was sad. Because she would have seen the whole line of us, all the trying, all the getting turned away, and she would have seen that it finally landed somewhere. That it finally held. I didn't know what to say to that. So I didn't say anything. I just stood there in my dining room, in the house that my grandmother never got to buy, and I let the weight of it press against my chest until it became something else. Not lighter, just different. Like carrying something precious instead of something painful. Update 4. What changed? People keep asking me what changed. How did I do what my parents couldn't? And for a long time, I didn't have a good answer, because the honest answer felt inadequate and also somehow disloyal. Here's what changed. The system moved. Slightly. Enough. The Georgia Dream program didn't exist when my parents were trying to buy. High-yield savings accounts weren't accessible to regular people until the internet made online banking mainstream. Credit education resources, free ones, good ones, didn't exist at scale until the last 10 years. The homebuyer education course I took was offered at no cost through a non-profit partnership that was only funded starting in 2019. I also had advantages my parents didn't. I had a college degree, which gave me access to higher-paying work. I had the internet, which gave me information. I had a stable economy during my prime saving years. No recession ate my progress. No predatory lender targeted my neighborhood at the exact moment I was vulnerable. And I had something else, something that I think is the most important and the least discussed. I had my parents' example. Not as a cautionary tale, not as a what not to do story. As a blueprint for discipline. My father's 31 years of showing up at 4:15 in the morning taught me what consistency looks like. My mother's pivot from home health aide to office work when her body couldn't handle the physical labor anymore taught me what adaptation looks like. Their willingness to try 3 times to buy a house, to be rejected and ripped off and systemically excluded, and to still maintain their dignity and their family and their faith, that taught me what resilience looks like. I didn't do something they couldn't do. I did something they built me to do. The difference is that the door was slightly more open when I got to it. Update 5. Where things stand now. It's been just over 2 months since I closed. The house is still a work in progress. I replaced the kitchen faucet with a YouTube tutorial and only mild swearing. The slow drain in the bathroom turned out to be a simple fix, a buildup of calcium deposits that a $7 bottle of CLR dissolved overnight. I painted the living room a color called Warm Honey that looked golden and sophisticated on the sample card and looks more like mustard on the walls, but I'm keeping it because it's mine and I chose it. My parents come over every weekend. My father has adopted the screened porch as his personal domain. He brings his own chair, a folding camp chair that he insists is more comfortable than any of my furniture, and he sits out there with the radio tuned to the AM station that carries the Braves. He is, I think, the happiest I have ever seen him, and he would never say that, because James Carter does not discuss happiness. He just shows up with tools and sweet tea and a camp chair. My mother has begun what I can only describe as a covert interior design campaign. She brings something every time she visits: a set of kitchen towels, a small plant, a framed print she found at a thrift store. She arranges these items with careful precision, and when I ask her about them, she says, "I just thought it needed something." She is building my home from the inside out, one small gift at a time, and I have stopped trying to refuse because I understand now that this is how she's participating in something she was never able to do for herself. Marcus has his credit score up to 641. He's set up automatic savings. He calls me every other week to ask questions. He's not ready yet, but he's getting ready, and that matters. My Aunt Teresa told the rest of the family about my grandmother's story. 2 of my cousins have started asking me about homebuyer programs. One of them, Destiny, is 26 and works as a dental hygienist in Decatur. She attended the same homebuyer education course I took. She sat in the same fluorescent-lit conference room and took her own notes. The guilt hasn't disappeared. I don't think it will. But my mother was right. It's not a debt I owe. It's a responsibility I carry. Not to feel bad about what I have, but to use it. To leave the door a little more open than I found it. To make sure that the line of trying, from my grandmother in Macon in 1972, to my parents on Connolly Drive, to me in the West End, doesn't end with me. Last Sunday, after dinner, my father was sitting on the screened porch in his camp chair. I brought him a glass of sweet tea and sat in the chair beside him. The magnolia tree was blooming, enormous white flowers, absurdly beautiful, the kind of thing you don't believe is real until you see it in your own yard. "Daddy," I said, "do you ever feel like you missed out? Not having your own place?" He took a sip of his tea. He looked at the magnolia tree. He was quiet for long enough that I thought he wasn't going to answer. "I feel like I'm sitting on my daughter's porch," he said, "drinking sweet tea, watching a tree bloom in her yard. I feel like everything I did was for something." He reached over and patted my hand once. Then he turned the radio up. The Braves were winning. Edit: I did not expect this to get the response it has. I've gotten a lot of messages asking about the specific steps I took, the credit building, the saving strategy, the assistance programs. I'm going to put together a detailed post about that soon, with the spreadsheet template and the resources I used. If my story can help someone else start the process, then the magnolia tree keeps growing. And to everyone who shared their own stories about being the first in their families to buy, thank you. We're not alone in this. We never were. We just couldn't always see each other.